It's tax attorney John Hyre, H-Y-R-E here, answering another question. These are the sorts of questions that we answer in the inner circle. You're going to notice I like to do more than just answer the question. I like to go into great detail and explain why. I think that's a lot more useful. All right, I'm going to walk through this slide because I noticed things. The actual question the slide is asking is a very simple one, and I could answer it very quickly. But the things I saw written in the description as a tax planner lead me to issues I would want to point out for a client. Now, this is not a client. This is educational in nature, right? You need to run everything I say by an actual tax professional because I don't know everything about you, and we don't have a contract saying I'm liable for giving you tax advice. So it's educational, not advice. But when I have a client, what do? When they start telling me things, I don't just look at the question they're asking. I think about what should they be asking. I'm going to have to start taking a small salary from an S corporation, which you do, right? S corporations, you're required to pay a reasonable salary. You can get a salary study done, kind of like an appraisal for salaries, usually pretty cheaply, $500 to $1,000. We know people who do those, and we recommend people do those about every 3 years. For the same reason, you do an appraisal on real estate to reduce the property tax. You do an appraisal on your S corporation salary to see how low can you go. In most cases, some taxpayers pay more salary than they need to. That doesn't normally make a lot of tax sense. I have seen it done. So I'm going to have to start taking a small salary. I'm anticipating monthly. Let's talk about that. Within S corporations, there are two ways to get paid. You can pay the salary and you live on it. You can also take distributions. In fact, with an S corporation, usually you want to take money as a distribution. What's a distribution? I own the company. It has money. It gives me money, not for doing work. That's a salary, right? When I work for the company, it pays me a salary. The distribution is I own the company and I'm being paid as an owner, not a worker. Now, if the company makes enough money that you can live off distributions, then I would take distributions monthly or however often it is you need to take them in order to live. And I would wait until about November to figure out how much salary to pay. Now, you still have to file the salary paperwork in most cases every month, but it's just going to be a zero on it, which makes it easier and cheaper. And you wait until the end of the year to see what kind of salary you're going to pay. The only exception to that is if you're putting money into, for example, a solo 401k. Solo 401k contributions in an S corporation are largely, not entirely, but largely driven off of how much salary you pay. So if you want to contribute to a solo K early in the year, you want to pay a salary early in the year. Why would you want to contribute to a solo K early in the year if you're able to? Because the sooner you have money into the solo K or other retirement account, the sooner you can start investing tax-free. So you see how there are a lot of factors here. You have to pay a minimum salary. There are studies and ways to determine what that minimum is. There are two ways to take compensation from an S corporation. I use the term compensation loosely. You can take a distribution. It gives you money as an owner, or you can take a salary. It gives you money as a worker. The fact that you have to pay a salary does not mean you have to pay it under law every 2 weeks or every month. You could pay it once a year. And oftentimes in terms of payroll costs and simplicity, and also having an idea of how much salary can it pay, waiting till the end of the year can make a lot of sense. But conversely, if one of the things you're doing in your S corporation is using that salary to fund a beautiful Roth solo 401k or just a regular Roth 401k, if you happen to have other employees, oftentimes you want to be able to fund the 401k earlier in the year, because the earlier I have money in my tax-free Roth, the sooner I start investing tax-free. But if contributions to 401ks are driven by salary, now I have an incentive to pay in the beginning of the year. And so depending on your facts, you might pay every 2 weeks. You might pay in the beginning of the year. You might pay at the end of the year. You might do both. It just depends on your facts. But the things I underline trigger thoughts in my head above and beyond the question that you asked. I'm going to have to start taking a small salary, anticipating monthly soon, from my New York, S corporation, where I do things like dog boarding in my house, affiliate marketing, and crypto trading. Busy. I'm a one-person company. I have a separate Delaware Series LLC. I hate Delaware for entrepreneurs. It's too expensive. There's no benefit. The odds of Delaware benefiting you from an asset protection standpoint when you reside in New York or pretty much any other state, especially New York, are infinitesimally small. Delaware is also, if you're going to go out of state, let's say going out of state were legitimate, and it's not. And I've done entire hour-long sessions on why using a Nevada or Wyoming or Delaware LLC usually does not make sense. Now, again, this is where AI gets it wrong because AI feeds on the internet. The internet is the home of TMI and GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, too much information. What's on the internet? Well, these guys out of Nevada make a lot of money, Nevada and Utah make a lot of money selling you bogus asset protection ideas, like the idea that having a Delaware LLC matters when your business is in New York. 99.9% of the time, it doesn't. What's my other issue with Delaware? I have two other issues. One, they're expensive. If having an out-of-state entity is appropriate, and it almost certainly is not in your case, if having an out-of-state entity is appropriate, I prefer Wyoming. Nevada has a reputation for sleaze, I think justly earned, and it's somewhat expensive. Delaware is very expensive. It's designed for Fortune 500. So if you're going to go out of state, I like Wyoming. It has good law, and it's cheaper, and it doesn't have quite the reputation for sleaze that Nevada does, and it doesn't have anywhere near the costs that Delaware does. I hate series LLCs. I did an entire, I think it was about a 90-minute presentation. The old one will be in the inner circle. We'll do a new one just to update it. Series LLCs are not appropriate for small investors. And I know they're sold all over the internet. They're not appropriate for small investors. One way to look it up, because my conclusion happens to mirror, in this case, that of a guy named J. Adkisson, Adkisson. Look up J. Adkisson, Series LLC, Forbes. J. Adkisson, Series LLC, Forbes. He explains why small investors should not, and he helped design, he helped invent, he helped implement Series LLCs. He is one of the leading experts in the country on it. And he said it's really not for small investors. And I agree with him. Somebody sold you something. Delaware is not appropriate. Series LLCs are not appropriate. And together, I know it sounded sexy. I know you feel safe. I know they sold you on something safe. And you're not alone, by the way. So nothing wrong with you. You trusted someone who came off as an expert and wasn't. They had something to sell. Delaware Series LLC generally only makes sense if you're looking to go public. You're doing a securities offering or you're looking to go public. Then I start looking at Delaware. Series LLCs, even in that circumstance, I probably wouldn't do. In fact, I'm not. I am setting up a Delaware LLC in order to have a fund, right? There's a hard money investment that I want others to be able to invest in. The minimum contribution for this hard money investment is $1 million. A lot of my people can't put $1 million in. I'm setting up what's called a feeder or fund of funds. It's a very lucrative fund. It's been making investors about 18% per year. I think this year they're going to dip down to 15% return for investors, but I think they'll bring it back up. And in order to legitimately do this under securities laws, I need to have a separate fund, a feeder fund or a fund of funds. It's in Delaware because I want Delaware law to apply in this case. In this case, Delaware law, when it comes to securities, is very relevant. That's an exception to the rule. I normally won't touch Delaware because it's too expensive. And even with this, I'm not using a Series LLC. It doesn't save money when you look at how they actually work. So I would really rethink your structure. Furthermore, if the S-Corp owns the Delaware Series LLC, that's just wrong. You do not want rentals and owner financing on previous rentals in an S-Corporation. And again, we've done entire 2-hour presentations on why you should not put assets that you hold for income or appreciation, things like rentals, things like notes, should not be in an S-Corporation. So having an LLC owned by the S-Corporation means these assets, these income-producing assets or assets that are appreciating, capital assets, the rentals, the notes, they're still indirectly owned by the S-Corporation. And that's a problem. Again, I don't want to go into the rules too much, but there are limitations on when you put those properties in an S-Corp, especially the rentals, in terms of the benefits you can get. Furthermore, I can't fix that problem. It's very rare when somebody puts things like crypto or stock or gold or rental properties in particular, notes, into an S corporation, which is what you've done. It's just a little indirect because the S corporation owns the LLC these things are in. It's very difficult to get that out of an S corporation. There's a huge tax cost. In fact, it's almost impossible to get it out without paying the tax costs. So I'm going to tell you, don't do this again. Stop doing this. It's very common. You've been poorly advised. I've seen this a million times. There's nothing wrong with you. You just had a poor advisor, somebody who was probably doing a hard and fast sales pitch, that sort of thing. We've all fallen for it at some point on something. I also have a separate Wyoming LLC as a holding company that was formed recently. And maybe that makes sense and maybe not, but it's a lot cheaper than Delaware, and it's not owned by the S-Corp, which is good. And it only does passive investments. Well, that's good. That's where the investments belong. I am personally the 100% owner of the Wyoming LLC. Okay, that makes sense to me. By the way, keep it as a holding company. There's case law that says if you do more than hold assets in there, it can create problems for asset protection, something I've discussed. I spent some time. There was a case out of Pennsylvania I discussed in my entities course that goes over holding companies should only hold. They shouldn't, for example, manage things. Sometimes people use holding companies as management companies and pay other company bills through there. You shouldn't do that. What is the best strategy and steps to start taking a salary from the S-Corp to minimize the cost to set up and minimize potential taxes I have to pay? Well, you want to keep the salary as small as possible because unlike your distributions from the S-Corp, the salary is subject to Social Security tax. In fact, that's the only point of an S-Corp. When you have something that would normally be subject to self-employment tax, you put it in an S corporation. What's normally subject to self-employment tax? You sell stuff or you sell services. You pay self-employment tax if you have it in your name or a regular LLC. If you convert it to an S, you only pay Social Security taxes on the salary, which is why everybody wants a small salary, right? The smaller the salary, the less I pay in Social Security taxes. And then the IRS pushes back and says, hey, now, you have to have a reasonable salary. It can't be too small, which is why we recommend people do periodically get cheap $500 to $1,000 salary studies done every few years to figure out how low can I go. Your goal is to keep the salary as low as possible. Ways to save money, talk to your payroll provider to make sure we're not missing anything because states have different payroll rules and your provider will know those. I don't. I know the federal rules. I prefer to pay salary only once a year at the beginning or the end, maybe twice a year, maybe at the beginning, the fund a 401k, and at the end of the year when I have a better sense of how much can it pay. I like to live off of distributions if possible. In other words, I have to have enough money to distribute, but also pay a reasonable salary. So if I can get away with it, I want to live off of the distributions and I want to maximize the distributions. I still pay income tax on the distributions. I pay income tax on the salary, but I don't pay Social Security tax on the distributions. So my advice would be make the salary, all things being equal, as small as possible. Now, if you want to put a lot of money in a retirement account, that's an incentive to pay a larger salary. So now we have offsetting goals here. Now it depends. But in general, you pay the smallest salary possible and pay it as infrequently as possible. It's simpler and it gives you a better control over payroll costs. So that answers the question you asked, which was actually a pretty straightforward, simple question. It's just I saw a lot of things here in the narrative that for me were questions that should be asked. And so I thought I would ask them for you and provide the answers.